Hey everybody, Jay Weidner, Reality Check. Thanks for watching. I want you all to know that my new film, JFK X, Solving the Crime of the Century, is up on about 21 platforms right now, including Amazon Prime, YouTube, Tubi, Apple. I can't even name them all. It should be within 2 weeks up everywhere. So support the filmmakers and go see it. I did that film with Ryder Lee, and we're going to do two more films. Um, so anyway, that's my only announcement. I'm back with a guest I had on years ago, right when I first started the show, actually. And he's a psychotherapist. Let me read his bio because I was just reading it, and it's quite interesting. Let me see here. Where is it? Hang on, I'm going to do this. I can do this. Yeah, so Jerry is a retired licensed psychotherapist with over 40 years of experience working with and studying the thought processes of psychotic and criminally insane patients in some of the most volatile psychiatric institutions in the nation. Jerry is a commercial pilot, a certified scuba driver, a long distance motorcyclist. He held the position of second lieutenant in the Arizona Civil Air Patrol and assistant scoutmaster. He is awarded the state of Arizona's Meritorious Service Award and the Pima College Apple Award of Teaching Abnormal Psychology. His formal academic training comprises a BA in psychology from Temple University and a master's degree in counseling from the University of Georgia, and 2 years of study in a PhD psychology program. He is the author of an amazing journey into the psychotic mind, breaking the spell of the ivory tower, and is currently has a private practice in Arizona. And hang on, get back here. So, how you doing, Jerry?
I'm doing great.
Um, so let we hardly had anybody watching when we did our first couple shows a few years back. Why don't we do a recap? Why don't you tell us about what happened, how you got involved, and what you're about to tell us when you were in these institutions, what you witnessed, and what made you kind of change your mind about mental illness and what was really going on there.
Well, I always had a deep mistrust of authority. As it started with that. And I went to work after I got my master's degree. I went to work at the biggest psychiatric institution on the planet, which was Central State Hospital in Millersville, Georgia. They had 10,000 patients there when I got there. It was they had for somebody who was interested in mental illness and was an adrenaline junkie, that was like a candy store for me. So it got kicked off early when I was studying abnormal psychology at Temple University. Some clinical psychologists wrote that if two patients with the same delusion met each other, like if both of them thought they were Michelle Obama or something, one of them would have to change. And I'm like, why would that have to happen? I mean, even as an undergraduate, I mean, they're both nuts. Why would one of them have to change? But he writing this formal paper with, APA format, all this junk. And I just logged that in the back of my head. So fast forward probably about 8 years. I was on the second floor of one of the psychiatric units at Central State. And here's this fella walking around talking to somebody that I couldn't see. It sounded like half of a telephone conversation where you can only hear one side, but somebody's responding. Now, what we were taught in college was that the voices that these people hear are hallucinations. So when I heard that, I went, hallucinations, they're all over the place. It should be like, fruit salad or word cabbage or something like that. But here he is carrying on a coherent conversation with somebody I couldn't see, and he didn't have a phone. So here's this argument going on, this diatribe just going. Then I was crept up on him a little bit to kind of say, well, what exactly is he talking about, and who is he talking to? And as I approached him, he caught me. So he turned around, and I said, Well, I'm Jerry. I'm the psych for this unit. I hadn't seen you before. Are you new to the unit? He said, yeah. And I said, what's your name? And he said, I'm Jesus Christ. And I looked at him and I said, no, you can't be Jesus Christ because I am. And I was like, okay, what's he going to do? You know, was this clinical psychologist telling me the truth? And I'm sitting there on pins and needles. It's, what's he going to do? And he's like thinking about it, you know, like, oh, and he goes, okay, looks at me and he goes, we can both be Jesus Christ and walks off happily. I'm like, okay, you know, what else did they lie to me about? You know, so this distrust of authority. I mean, it was just, I was just looking for it, you know. Second thing that came up, nobody in that entire hospital was curious about what these voices are telling these people. So, you know, here's hundreds of them hearing these voices, and not a single one of them is curious about what they're telling them or what they are, because they were taught in school by the psychiatric mafia and the big pharma that took over the educational system back in, what is it, 1910 with the Flexner report, where the big pharma paid off the government to make it that they had to teach pharmaceutically based coursework in the universities.
Right.
So big pharma took over the universities in 1910, and yeah, nobody knows about that. You know, anything that was taught otherwise than if they weren't teaching pharmacological medicine, they couldn't graduate doctors.
Right.
So they just took took control of the whole medical system, and then they took control of the universities, and it just went from there on. You know, they took control of everything.
Yeah, no
So
nuance.
so they, you know, they started this biochemical imbalance thing. First they blamed schizophrenia on the mothers. You know, the mothers did something wrong. They screwed up somehow. They badgered their kids and they made the mother schizophrenic. But that was too observable. You know, they needed something that they could move up into an area that people couldn't investigate. So they went, okay, it's genes. You know, they said it's a genetic disorder, but they didn't have any proof for it. They just said it, and what that did, it boosted the research from everybody being able to see what was going on, as with mothers, to a very small group of geneticists, highly trained geneticists, you know, most of which weren't interested in schizophrenia, and they got away with that for what, decades? I mean, oh yeah, it's a genetic disorder, or it's a multiple genetic disorder, making it more and more complicated, kicking it upstairs, so the vast majority of the human race could not verify what they were saying.
Right.
Thank God there was an honest group, a small honest group of geneticists who did the research and finally said, hey, we don't see any genetic link anywhere. Look for yourselves. It's not there. Right. So that lie fell apart. But they needed some excuse for what schizophrenia was and what caused it, because they didn't want to look stupid. You know, so Eli Lilly, back in the 70s, when they came out with, I believe it was Prozac, they just made up a lie. Oh, it's a biochemical imbalance. They knew it was wrong at the time. They just made it up, threw it out there, and then funded it, you know, through all the magazines, all the research papers. They paid for any research that would back their standing, a biochemical imbalance. You know, then I noticed, okay, that's what I was taught in school. So I entered the hospital thinking, well, it's a biochemical imbalance. I believed it. But then I noticed that before the psychiatrist ordered any medication, they never did any lab tests. They never did any kind of X-ray, EEG, EK, nothing. They just, oh, well, you're having these symptoms. Well, let's try this. You know, it was just completely subjective. And I'm going like, well, where's the baseline? You know, what's out of balance by how much? I went to the psychiatrist and said, what's going on here? You know, there is no baseline. How do you know there's a chemical imbalance? Oh, because the pharmaceutical people, they do all the research. They told us that. And I'm like, what? You know, that's like letting the fox loose in the hen house. And this guy was serious. I mean, one of the psychiatrists. Like, my heavens. You know, later I found out that not only did they make that up, that they have no idea what the chemical balance of the brain should be in the first place.
Right.
Let alone what was that, you know, there's what, 25 neurotransmitters or 23, something like that. They have no idea what the base value of any of those are. It's a complete lie. They fabricated it all. They published it. They pushed it on the population. So here again, here you need now biochemists to go after that. You know, the average guy like you and me and psychiatry and the regular doctor, they can't see that stuff. So here they got away with it for another century. Meanwhile, they're making billions of dollars selling these toxic drugs to people, bringing down their vibration, dumbing them down. You know, you can't go into a psychiatrist's office and not come out with some kind of drug prescription. I mean, that's what they do. They're drug pushers for big pharma. So in the meantime, I'm trying to figure out what these voices are telling these people. So at the state hospital, psychiatrists were getting beat up at an abnormal rate. They were getting beat up more than psych nurses, psychologists, and any of the other staff, counselors, any others. And they were only working with these people for like, what, 20 minutes a month? And I'm always thinking, like, what in the blazes are they telling these people where they're getting the crap kicked out of them after 20 minutes? You know, I never could figure it out. 7 years later, I finally figured it out. But they didn't want to do anything to upset these guys, anything at all. And nobody knew what the voices were saying. None of them were the least bit interested. They all believed it was they were hallucinations. Based on what? They didn't do any research on that. The psychiatric mafia just stepped up. Well, we're psychiatrists, so we hereby declare that they are hallucinations because we said so. They didn't do any.
What's a hallucination? I mean,
what's a hallucination? And did they do any research to see what they were? No, they just made the declaration. They're hallucinations. It's due to a chemical imbalance in the brain, which was also a lie. So this entire mental health system that we got going now is based on deception and fraud. I mean, in my opinion.
it seems to be contagious. Mental health issues seem to be growing by the day.
And in fact, they are. You know,
but you actually talk to these guys.
I actually talked to these guys, and I started finding patterns to the voices.
Tell us.
Well, the first pattern I found was that these voices were completely negative. Yeah. They would tell these guys. Now, it took me probably 2 years to learn how to talk to these guys because there was nothing in it for them to talk to people like me.
Right.
Usually, if they did that, they'd get hauled to a psychiatrist's office. They'd be filled with drugs or more drugs on top of the drugs they were already taking. You know, if they talk to their friends about them, they lose their friends. They talk to their family about them, they get hauled into the psychiatrist's office. There's no positive outcome for these guys to talk to anybody about those voices. On top of the voices threatening them, which I didn't know at the time, that if they told people about them, that they would make their lives miserable. And indeed they did. Now, I didn't know back then at the time exactly what they were, but what I was seeing was patterns. And I would pull these guys in the state hospital. There was no shortage of schizophrenics. I would pull these guys aside and I'd ask them, well, what are these voices telling you? And every time I got a little piece of the puzzle, it was like a little gem. I'd put it in my little pouch of things I knew about the voices. Then I could use that later. I said, well, I'm a new patient. I already know this much about them. What else can you tell me? So that helped a lot because it was like, now they saw that I was serious about learning about these things, that I knew stuff that other staff didn't, and they were willing to give me more stuff.
That was clever.
So they were willing to trust me a little more. So, you know, I didn't turn them into psychiatry unless I absolutely had to. So the first pattern I saw was negativity. His voices were consistently negative. It wasn't random. I mean, it wasn't good sometimes, you know, good period, lukewarm. It was consistently negative. You're ugly, you're stupid, you're rotten, nobody likes you, everybody's looking at you, they're laughing at you behind your back, you got nothing coming, you're worthless, you're ugly, you'll never amount to any, that kind of stuff, you know, all the time, 24 hours a day, going.
You know, after we did our conversation, I did an unscientific survey of people that I know, and I asked that each one of them, do you have negative voices in your head? And I was surprised. it was quite a bit. It was at least 10% of the people said, yeah, I
Uh,
do have a voice in my head telling me how bad I am and how ugly I am. And I thought, my God, this is
well,
much more pervasive than I ever thought.
well, it's even much more pervasive than that. Everybody has them. So Emanuel Swedenborg, the Christian mystic from 300 years ago,
Yep.
he said that you got two demons assigned to you and two angels, and the demons will put those thoughts in your head. Now, what surprised me when I prayed to hear them once, and they almost killed me, or they tried to. I mean, they didn't come close, but they tried to. But what surprised me was they sounded just like all the thousands of other thoughts that I have running through my head all day, all the time. Yeah, there wasn't any like you are, or, there wasn't any of that. It
Yeah.
sounded just like my regular thoughts.
Right.
Only I would never think those kind of things. Like for me, they were trying to drown me in the middle of a lake. I was a good swimmer. I wasn't worried about it. They kept telling me I'm just going to drown, and they were using a yes set to try to convince me that I couldn't make it back to shore, that I was too tired, I was going to drown. It's a trained scuba diver. I love the water. I mean, it was true I couldn't make it back to shore at that time. I needed to rest up some. They kept telling me, you're going to drown, you're going to drown, you're going to drown. Finally, I ended up at the bottom of the lake with them telling me I was going to drown, stuck in the mud, and just like a dead man. So I was fighting them all the way down, every step of the way, until about 10 at night. I ended up 35 feet down at the bottom of the lake with my feet stuck in the mud, hanging there like a dead man. I told them that in the PhD program and got a diagnosis of schizoaffective it was they gave me. I was furious. I was absolutely furious. You bunch of dumbasses, man. What a bunch of fools. So what was there? I mean, it was lukewarm water. My feet were stuck in the mud. All my senses were turned off. I was scared because this thing wasn't me that was talking to me, and I couldn't feel anything. All the senses were shut down. Feet in the mud. I couldn't feel my feet. I was scared, so I wasn't thinking. And all I realized was I am aware that I'm aware. That's it. My body was gone. It was because of the conditions down there, bathroom water, just floating, and that's what's there. That's what's there beyond all the senses. And these things are throwing these thoughts into our minds. So psychology and psychiatry don't ask where thoughts come from. They've never pulled the thought out of anybody's head during an autopsy and put it on the table and went, oh yeah. Yeah. They don't even ask that question where it comes from. Again, Swedenborg answered that. They come from outside of you.
Yep.
And it
Yeah.
depends on what your frequency is. Low frequency, their negative thoughts come in higher frequency, better thoughts are coming in. But you're always going to get them. They're always sticking thoughts into your thought stream.
Yeah, I highly recommend reading Heaven and Earth by Emanuel Swedenborg. It was a real life-changing thing for me when I read it. And I began to really realize Heaven and Hell, I'm sorry.
Heaven and Hell.
I began to realize that, there's these planes of existence,
right?
Just like he describes, and that each plane holds not necessarily different entities, but different forms. And the denser ones are actually below us. There's 7 layers below us into the earth, and that's where the denser beings are. And you don't want to go there under any circumstances, because it literally, you don't stay there forever. But man, 5 minutes there is like eternity in total hell. And so, I used to practice. I don't do it so much anymore, but I used to actually try to, I had a practice where I went into the upper realms and I would visit entities and talk. And I actually got really good information about things. And I was told exactly what your book is saying and what you're saying, which is, that these entities are floating around all the time. There's literally trillions of them. And they're looking for an opening all the time, waiting for an opening to get in there. And usually the opening for the bad guys is when you did something really bad. That creates an opening that puts them in control. And I really actually believe this is actually what's going on with mental illness today. And I believe that the entities are making entertainment, which also opens up the people
Exactly
viewing
right.
it, and sports too, man,
And war.
and oh, especially
Okay.
war.
So they feed on us. I
Yeah,
mean, they. Uh, I hit a point where I was interviewing these guys, and there was a one-to-one correspondence between the voices attacking them and their energy levels dropping down to nothing. You know, and I thought for years that that was due to the negativity of the voices. But one day I was assigned to the jail for the prison. There were two prisoners that I got a letter from the captain of that jail. So the worst of the worst went to this place, and I was the psych for this place. Captain wrote me a letter, said, listen, we got a problem in this cell. We got a seriously mentally ill guy who's got no medications. He's talking to the voices. He's pacing the cell. He's standing over his cellmate at 3 a.m, staring down at him.
God.
You know,
I,
so they're locked into this little small, what, 8 by 10 cell. I mean, not very big. So one of them is psychotic. The other one was put in there because he snitched off the Aryan Brotherhood. These are the violent gangsters there. Snitched off one of their drug deals. They'd already stabbed him a couple of times. They wanted him dead because the security broke up the gang, sent him to all these other prisons. They lost all their drugs, and they were furious. They wanted him dead. They wanted him dead so bad that they got in trouble to get into that unit so they could have a chance to get at him. And they're sticking these notes under his door. We're here. We're waiting for you. As soon as we can get our hands on you, you're done. You know, so this poor guy, you can't be under much more pressure than this guy. He's locked in there with a flaming psychotic staring down at him at 3 a.m. Who knows what he's going to do? Who knows why he was put in there? And then here's the gangsters outside throwing notes under his door saying, we're going to kill you. You know, short of war, you can't be too much more stressed out than being locked into a small cell like that with a flaming psychotic.
yeah.
So I bring him out to talk to him to find out what's going on, and I bring the other guy out first, the guy who wasn't psychotic, and I watch him come up the steps to where the cell block control room is, and there was an interview room. He had plenty of energy. He's bounding up the steps. He didn't have to use the guardrail. He, briskly walked over, sat down. He's got plenty of energy. He's coherent, good flow to his thought. He wasn't like, he wasn't depressed. He was anxious. You could expect that, but he had plenty of energy. All right. Pulled the next guy in, the psychotic guy. He could barely make it up the steps. He was just, trudging up those steps. He drug his feet, sat down in the chair. He's like wiped out. Are you hearing voices? Yeah, I'm hearing voices. I hear lots of voices. I hear them all the time. And I said, well, how's your energy level? I don't have any energy. And after that, it was real clear to me that it wasn't just the content of the voices. I mean, it wasn't the anxiety causing that. There's a one-to-one correlation between the energy leaving of schizophrenics, something taking their energy, and it had to be the voices. So
So that would indicate then that there's an actual entity attached.
well, they get us all.
Yeah, within us all. Yeah, but with these guys, it's a very negative entity that's attached, and it's probably
Draining him.
yeah, because what it is, they're made out of plasma, and the plasma just will, you can either give you energy, or it can take your plasma energy, and that's what it's doing. And because these things are mostly electro, chemical in their manifestations, and they're invisible, and they're everywhere, and they can be photographed under the right conditions, believe it or not. And I've seen things that I know because I've seen them with my own eyes. And I tell the story. I don't know if I told it to you, but one time I was working for a big corporation, and you get in corporations, you get assigned to projects, and you have budget and all of this stuff, and you have to hit your marks, and otherwise you get called up in front of your superiors and all this. And so I had this project going. I had a certain budget for it, and somebody from another department did something to cause me to go over budget. It was completely wrong what they did. And so I did I was a professional. I took him aside privately, right? I think I had my secretary with me, but I took him aside and I said, what you did was wrong. And I'm going to have to tell my boss that you did it. I don't want to hurt you, but I have to, because I went over budget by whatever, $5,000 or whatever. And I saw their face start grimacing and then getting really kind of grayish as I was talking. Then all of a sudden, and this is like maybe 100th of a second, I saw it. I saw
eyes went dark.
Oh my God, it was the most frightening thing I've ever seen in my life. And I either I gasped or I stepped backwards. I did something because they saw it. They saw that I saw it. And right. And they were freaked out. And then which is really interesting because I had to go back to my project that I was working on. So I couldn't go tell anybody anything.
Right. I know how that feels.
Yeah. So I'm going back and I'm living this normal life, and I can't tell anybody what I just saw because it'll sound like a complete crazy person. So then the end of the day, I go back to my office, right, to go clean up and go home. And my boss shows up at my door. And I'm like, uh-oh, what did I do now? Right. And he says, he accused me of exactly what they did. And they had gone straight up and told everyone that I had reacted violently to them and attacked them. And, fortunately there were security cameras so that, I could prove my point. But I was like, that's when I first realized that there were demons.
Yep,
And
that was one of them.
Yep. And that they will do anything. They will say anything, they will do anything.
Yep.
And have you ever heard of anyone having a split moment where they see something like that?
I did. Oh yeah, I stared that thing in the eye for a long time in the emergency room. When I was working in the emergency room, it was Christmas Eve one day, working in the county hospital emergency room. This guy came in shaking like a leaf. He was a meth addict. And I was asking,
fighting demons.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Meth just opens you up. I mean, it's like, come on in.
Yeah.
So this guy, I asked him, I said, well, do you see the shadow people? Because the meth guys, they all see the shadow people. They're three-dimensional dark shadows that walk through walls. They're darker than the rest of the room.
Yep.
He goes, I see them all the time. I've seen one pretty clear out of the corner of my eye, but I saw it.
I had one at the foot of my bed staring at me.
Yeah, they're spooky.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what they are or
I don't either.
Or what they
have
do.
no gravity though, because it jumped on me.
Yeah.
And I pushed it and there was nothing there.
Yeah.
But it reacted to my push. It fell off the bed.
Oh, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah, it tumbled and I saw it run down the hallway and out through the wall, right through the wall. So whoop, and was gone. And real fast too.
Yeah.
Yeah, really fast.
Yeah, I talked to a girl once that one walked through her and she said she could feel it. But this guy, I asked him, well, do you see the eyes? And if they see the eyes, they're much worse shaped than if they don't see the eyes. And the eyes are either red or lime green. Those are the two colors the eyes are.
Yeah, I didn't see the eyes of this.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing. So this guy, oh yeah, I see the eyes. And he should have been dead 5 years ago. I'm like 10 years of injecting meth. You should have been gone, half a decade ago. So I was real curious, what's going on with this guy? So I bring him in, I started asking him questions, and I asked, did you ever talk to him? Because they don't talk. I've never heard anybody out of the hundreds of patients I talked to who had these things, saw these things. None of them ever said a word. And I figured if anybody heard anything, it would be this guy. And he goes, yeah, I've talked to him. And I said, well, what did they sound like? And then all of a sudden that thing, just like you said, the eyes turned black. He stopped shaking. He went stark still. His face turned like a different person.
Yep.
His eyes were black. And this hatred, it was this cold hatred that I've never felt ever before in my life. And it was like it just went deep down.
That's exactly what happened to me.
Yeah, I never felt hatred like that in my life.
That's exactly what happened. It was the most hateful moment of my whole life.
Yeah, mine too. I've never experienced hatred like that anywhere. It was just this deep, cold hatred that was just silent and cold. And you can't run away. I mean, you can't run. I mean, that working with psychotics, you just can't run. So I had to weather this out, staring this thing in the eye, whatever it was,
Whoa.
and it's eyeball to eyeball, and it seemed like it went on forever. And I could feel this hatred, and the thought I got from it was like, I'd rather slit your guts open and
Yep.
spill your intestines all over the floor than say another word to you.
That is exactly what happened when we at that moment. I felt like
Yes.
this thing wants to kill me.
Yeah,
It wants to
exactly.
rip me apart.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The same
Like
thing I
like a
got.
dog or a wild animal.
Right. Exactly. And then he came back. The patient
Yeah.
came back. The dark eyes went away. His eyes came back, and he started shaking again from going stark still. He was shaking the whole time he was in the ER, from going stark still to shaking, and he's shaking back again. But I had to find out what these things told him. So what did I ask him? I said, did you ever hear him talk? He said, yeah. And I asked, what did they tell you? And it turns out they told him to go jump in front of a truck and he would be okay. And I asked him, well, what'd you do? He said, well, I went and jumped in front of a truck. I said, what happened? He said, well, I was hit. I was knocked off the road. I was laying there in the gutter. He said, they surrounded me, okay, and they're standing around me, and they said, get up, you're okay. And he said, I got up and I was okay. They said, go do it again. So he went and did it again, got up, and he was okay. So
Sort of
then
like that, those two Swedish girls. Remember
oh
that?
yeah, running down the
Yeah,
highway.
they get hit by
Yeah,
the
yeah,
car and
yeah.
have inhuman strength and
Right. They all have inhuman strength, man. I've seen some stuff that'll curl your toenails. But after that, that thing came back a second. I went to ask him another question. That thing came back again, and it was like it felt like an eternity.
wow.
And I'm like, after that one, I'm like, okay, I'm done. I can't deal with this anymore. So I sent him back to his room. I was going to admit him to the hospital. I mean, you're going in, buddy.
Yes.
I'm locking you down for a while, you know. And the psych nurse comes running in my office. What'd you get out of him? I can't deal with that guy. I can't even talk to him for half a minute. I mean, what'd you get? I'll write my report based on what you got. You know, so they're out there. But I kept asking these patients what these things were telling them, and these patterns started coming out. So if there's patterns coming out of the voices, and they're running well-defined fixed patterns, they can't be hallucinations.
Right. That makes sense.
Hallucinations don't run patterns. They're all over the place.
That's right.
So after 35, 40 years, I got a whole list of these patterns that they run. Now, these are perfectly observable to anybody who works with schizophrenics. I'm not taking them up and putting them in those. It's a multiple genetic problem or there's a biochemical imbalance. Anybody who has a schizophrenic in their house or is working with them can see these patterns for themselves. All they got to do is open their eyes and look, they're there. And if they're running patterns, they can't be hallucinations like the psychiatric mafia is telling us they are. It's a lie. They're just using that to sell their toxic drugs that are slowly poisoning people and rotting out their brains with long-term use. They don't tell you that though. So like we said before, the first pattern is negativity. Now listen to these things. They mimic exactly what the government is telling us right now.
That's right.
It's a one-to-one correspondence between what psychotics are hearing and what we're being fed by the government over the mainstream media. Negativity, constant negativity, war, murder,
if
killing,
it leads, it
rape.
leads.
That's right. That anti-religious. They hate, why would a hallucination act like worms thrown on a hot frying pan when you repeat the 23rd Psalm? Why would a hallucination care? Every time you repeat the 23rd Psalm to these voices, they act like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. There's a strong reaction. They can't stand it. They don't like preachers. They don't like church. They don't like any spiritual anything. Why would a hallucination do that? They foster and create negative emotion, a fixed pattern. They energetically drain their victims. So they're parasites.
Yep.
Okay. And
Archons.
archons. And you talk to the schizophrenics, like, how do you feel after before the voices come? How do you feel after they leave? So I did an actual study on this once when I was in the hospital. Had a 1 to 10. How much energy do you feel you have before the voices come? How much energy do you feel you have after they leave? Did that with scores of patients. We ran an analysis of variance on it, and it became statistically significant. There's something there. These things drain your energy. And you talk to schizophrenics, they'll say, after the voices come, I'm drained. I have no idea how they take that energy out, how they get it out, how they feed on us, but they're feeding on us. And they're not just feeding on the schizophrenics. Anybody who's thinking negative, they're pulling that energy out too. You can do the stress testing thing, with somebody feeling a negative thought, help them to hold a negative thought in mind, put your hand around them, push their arm down. They got no strength. These things
That's
get
exactly
louder.
right. Yeah. And, when I was a screenwriter, I first was getting into this subject. I wrote a screenplay, and the opening scene was a boxing match in a big stadium. And the fight starts, of course, and they're just whacking the hell out of each other. And a swarm of these dark, like insect spiritual beings are flooding into as everybody's cheering and
Yeah.
it's
They're
getting
feeding
worse.
on it.
And right. And as the swarm would infect everyone, they would just get crazier and
Yeah.
crazier. And I really believe that's actually true. That's
Just
why
like
I stopped.
football games.
Yep, I stopped attending sports events like 20 years ago because
Yeah.
they were draining. I would be drained after a sporting event.
Yeah, they're draining everybody in those sporting events. These things get louder after sunset. They get louder between 3 and 4 in the morning. And they drain people. They wake people up at 3 and 4 in the morning. They can't get back to sleep. And then they start on them. You're ugly. You're stupid. You said the wrong thing.
That person
you're
hates
worthless.
you.
That person hates you. They're laughing at you. You're no good. You're rotten. They get louder when ignored. They will not be ignored. I remember sitting in a psychiatrist's office with one of my patients once, and the patient's telling him, complaining about the voices. The psychiatrist said, well, I'll just increase your meds. Just ignore them. They're hallucinations. So I pulled that guy in a week later, just curious. Like I was real curious about all that. I'm always asking schizophrenics questions. What about this? What about that? What'd they tell you here? What about, question after question after question. What do you think about this? What about that? What do how do the voices react when you do this? I mean, thousands of questions. So I pulled that patient back that the psychiatrist said, just ignore him. I said, how'd that work out for you? He goes, didn't work out well at all. I said, well, what happened? He said, they got louder. They won't be ignored. So I pulled in all these other schizophrenics, said, what happens when you ignore them? They get louder. It's consistent. Another pattern. It's like the mainstream media. You ignore them, they get louder.
Yeah.
So these things match what's going on a macroscopic scale right now with our government and the mainstream media, false bullcrap that they're feeding us. They foster self-destructive behavior. Schizophrenics have a suicide rate of 3 to 5 times that of the normal population, but so do psychiatrists.
Yes, they do.
They're killing themselves at the same rate that schizophrenics are. Ain't that interesting?
Maybe because they're interacting with these entities.
Well, I think maybe, they've attacked me bunches of times. They foster isolation, just like what they did with COVID. The voices want these schizophrenics locked in their bedroom, away from their family. So family tries to interact with them, they explode, they call them names, they throw things at them, they make things miserable. The family finally gives up and let him go in his room and lock the door and keep him away from us. That's exactly what the voices want. They're feeding on them the whole time. They're taking more and more control. That's one of the worst things you could do, is let these guys get isolated. They demand the attention of their victims. You can't ignore them. They want your attention constantly. And you can look at these things. Anybody who works with schizophrenics can see these things. Again, if they're running patterns, they can't be hallucinations like the psychiatric mafia insists they are. They're full of it.
Yeah.
They maneuver for increased control over their victims. So it's constantly more control, more control, more control.
Sounds like you're describing our leaders.
Yeah. Well, I am. But what's going on in our country right now? The leaders are psychotic. They're crazy.
They are.
You know,
They are.
gaslighting. They gaslight constantly. I had one patient who they told him he murdered somebody. So he thought about going to the police station and turning himself in. But then if he didn't murder anybody, they'd know he was nuts and they'd lock him up. So every time a police car came around, he'd go crazy. You know, they're looking for him, and the voices would go, "Yeah, they're looking for you. They're hunting for you. You better go hide somewhere." So they're constantly bleeding him with this delusion that he has. They manipulate perception. You know, false evidence appearing real. You know, they have complete access to the schizophrenic's memory. They can pull up every rotten thing you've ever done and rub it in your face until they generate that negative emotional energy, and then they suck it dry. You see that with people. You don't see it with animals. You know, animals get into trouble. They escape a lion or something like that. They look around, the thing's gone, and they're back to living in the present. Not people. Why did you say that? Did you insult this guy? What are they thinking about you? I mean, constant. That's them. Okay? They demand the victim not tell others about their presence. The voices don't want anybody to know they're there. They tell the patient, if you tell anybody we're here, not only are we going to beat the crap out of you, but they're going to take you to a psychiatrist. They're going to lock you up. And unfortunately, that's what happens a majority of times. You know? Let me say, they're consummate liars. You can't believe anything they say. They lie about everything. Had two patients where they told the patient, and I've heard of a third, where they told the patient, if you gouge out your eye, we'll go away. We'll leave you alone. We won't ever come back. They gouged out their eyes. Next thing you know, those voices are back. You fool. You stupid fool. You believed us? You know, now look, you're a freak of nature. You know, you can't go anywhere. You're gouged out your eye. You look like a monster. You stupid fool. That's what we're dealing with. These things. That's what they are. They consistently steer their victim away from anything that might generate joy or peace. They don't want that feeling.
That really sounds like our leaders.
And the news. Listen to the
news.
freaking news. Yeah, 10,000 murders, people robbing the stores, people getting killed all over the place. 40,000 people have been killed in the war so far, and I mean, look at the crap they're feeding us constantly. You know, they can manipulate feeling without speaking, without speaking. So you can be sitting around minding your own business, everything's feeling good, and then you get this feeling of just dread, you know, or depression. It comes out of nowhere. That's them. They can short circuit reason. You know, they'll tell patients, escape from the mental hospital or escape from the hospital. And even though it's virtually impossible to do that, they'll tell them. Boredom is bad. They want the patient to be bored because they can take more control when they're bored. They try to pass themselves off as thoughts belonging to the victim. That's their biggest trick, because the thoughts sound just like your thoughts, but they're not. You know, and we're all taught from the time we're kids that every thought that comes into your head belongs to you. These things know that, so they put these thoughts in your head, and if you believe they belong to you and they're yours, then you actually become the voices, because you're responding to their thoughts that don't belong to you. So Sherry Sweeney came up with the saying, any negative thought about yourself or anybody else is them putting those thoughts in your head. Now, one of the biggest things with schizophrenia and schizophrenics, and that the psychiatric mafia won't even go here. They have to make a decision. You know, what are the voices? If they listen to the psychiatric mafia, they're going to tell them, your brain is broken. You got a chemical imbalance. There's nothing you can do about it. You're helpless. All you can do is depend on us and take our toxic drugs. Worst choice possible out of the three. Second one is, I don't know what they are. I'm not sure what they are. They may be hallucinations. They may be something else. You know, they're just not sure. And then there's a solid third that go, they're demons. No doubt about it. They're demons. So in order for them to recover, they can't believe what psychiatry says. Psychiatry takes it. It's like Dante's hell, where it says, anybody who enters here, leave all hope behind. That's exactly what psychiatry is doing. You have no control. There's nothing you can do about it. You have to rely on us and our drugs. You have to come back here once a month and get $800 to keep sane for 1 month. You know, they're just gouging these people to death. You go across the border to Mexico, and for $75, you can get the same pills made by the same company with a generic label and Mexican, labeling on it, and they're still making a profit at that level. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it.
Yep.
So they're just greedy SOBs. It's unbelievable. Selective forgetting. They can make you forget virtually anything. Working with these patients, I'll give them homework. Well, you need to do this, this, and this. If they don't write it down, they'll have forgotten virtually everything by the time they walk out of my office. These things can make you forget everything. You know? They fill the victims' minds with negative thoughts about themselves and others. It's consistent. They completely destroy any sense of positive self-concept. They attempt to pull their victim away from consensual reality, the reality that we kind of share, and pull them into this strange, dark reality of the voices. You know, they use confusion as a means of instilling negative suggestions, just like hypnotists. You know, people don't like to be confused, so they get the person confused, and then they suggest a remedy, and the person goes, "Oh yeah, that'll work," and just one more step along the way. You know, they're averse to anything positive or beautiful. They attempt to inform the schizophrenic patient that the voices are this is it. Trying to inform the schizophrenic patient that these things are parasites, they react vehemently. They just get violent at that point. So if they're going to explode when you tell them that they're parasites. You know, so as I was accruing these patterns, I would bring patients in and I'd question them about these patterns started falling into place one after another after another. Then I went, well, what would happen if I started throwing monkey wrenches in these patterns? How would the voices react? So I started doing that. You know, I'd give them each, this was in the prison where, you know, I got in trouble with psychiatry in the state hospital for asking schizophrenics questions about their voices. I was pulled up in front of the two psychiatrists. I was told they are hallucinations. You will not ask patients about them. You're making the patient worse by asking them questions about the voices. You're reinforcing their hallucinations, and we ordered you to stop. They don't even want you looking there. You know, so I had to be very careful in the state hospital. You know, it took 7 years to, you know, just to get an idea of what these things were in the first, you know, handful of patterns. But I knew they were running patterns. So if they're running patterns, they can't be hallucinations. When I went to work in the state prison in the psychology department, any prisoner who went whining to the warden or any of the authorities up there saying, "Oh, this psychologist is asking us questions about my voices, and I'm upset. I don't like it." Get out of my face, man! Go play in the sand or something. I mean, so I had a lot of freedom to ask without getting into trouble with the psychiatrist. You know, so
And that's where you basically formed this pattern recognition.
well, that's where a lot of them came from because I had a lot of freedom to experiment there until they started recovering. Once they started recovering, I was in trouble.
Oh
I
yeah.
thought they'd be happy about that. They weren't happy about that. They were acting like demons that had their butts on fire. You know, they were going after me. It was incredible.
Yeah.
So what I found is, and this was weird. As I'm interfering with these patterns and bringing these prisoners in, asking them, how are the voices reacting to what you did to interfere with the patterns? One after another, they'd say, they don't like it. They don't like you. They don't want us coming here. They said, stay in bed, stay away from that guy. He's a nutcase. Don't go back there. You know? So one after another, all these different prisoners are coming back and they didn't know each other. They didn't know that they were all doing the same thing. They were independent. They lived at different parts of the unit. They didn't know each other. And one after another, they're coming in. The voices are really getting pissed with you. They really don't like what you're doing. You know? Then one day, one guy comes in and he's leaving the office. He turns around and he looks at me and he goes, "You know what you're doing is dangerous, don't you?" And I just look at him like, "Where'd that come from?" And I didn't think it was dangerous. I'm like, "Well, they're stuck in your head. They're not in me. They're in you. You're stuck with them." I'm thinking I'm safe, you know. But I filed it in the little filing cabinet at the back of my head, and I'm like, I wonder what all that was about. You know, it was a warning, but I was just perplexed by it. I didn't really take it as a warning. I didn't know exactly what it meant, but it had some significance. So I put it in the filing cabinet.
You know,
So
I'm struck by your patterns there because it seems to be a description of what we're happening to us in the modern world.
it is.
So we're under demonic attack.
Yes, we are. On a
And
macroscopic scale.
right. And the and that explains a lot. Even social media and all of
Yep.
it just exacerbates the situation, and and no one will address it,
No, no,
outside of the spiritual world, because not every spiritual tradition believes what you're saying, but most do, including Islam.
yep.
Catholics for sure believe it. The Hindus believe it. Many Native American indigenous people believe it. They believe that there's this thing called Wetiko, which is where the demons get into one person in the tribe, and then that one person uses it to spread it out, and it's the shaman's duty to recognize Wetiko when it enters and to banish it forever from the tribe. That's the main job, according to the book Wetiko. And So I think, Paul Levy wrote that book, by the way. Great book. I highly recommend it. And so why don't you tell us the title of your book, because your book's really good too.
Yeah, it's called An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower.
Yes.
Okay. And it
Really
was
good
written,
book.
I read it with Sherry Sweeney, who,
Yep.
as a young woman, she heard these voices herself. She got rid of them with a program that she developed called That's a Lie program. Works very slowly, but it does work. Because
Right.
every time they tell the person something, they respond with "That's a lie." So if the patient doesn't believe what they're saying, these things can't get their claws in.
Yep.
They can only get them if they believe what they're saying, and they're consummate liars. They lie about everything.
Yeah, if I get a negative thought, the first thing that comes in is, "Oh, stop it!" Right?
Yeah, me too. I'll throw it. I'll
Like,
throw it out.
like this is so stupid. Just stop it, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And you're right about negative thoughts. I mean, I walk around in public places and I do everything I can to not judge everybody around me, or even when they're irritating me, because I know that once I get stuck in that routine, then I'm going to let all this negativity in, and I just don't even want it. I don't want to waste my life with it. That's
Right.
how I feel about it. It's just, and when I see other people with it, I used to try to help, but I don't know. Maybe I'll send them off to Sherry, and she can help them out. Anyway, I'm going to link up with your book and everything. It's really been a real pleasure having you on, Jerry. You're always amazing. You have really uncovered, I think, the most vital secret of all. And if we don't begin facing this truth, we're going to have mass schizophrenia on a level where you can't even go out and drive your car because you'll be afraid the person coming at you is going to drive into you. It's going to be that crazy.
Look at the statistic now. We have like 48,000 people committed suicide in the U.S. last year.
That's right.
The murder rate is up. The suicide rate is increasing.
That's right.
100,000 Americans are diagnosed with schizophrenia yearly. So these things are taking over at a mass rate.
A state trooper just told me, he said, "Man, ever since the start of 2021, I have had the craziest, weirdest accidents out on the highways. Things that I can't explain are going on out there." He said, "Just weird, like the person just lost their mind suddenly and did something so odd, and usually costs other people's lives and their lives."
Right.
And death rates are increasing, excess mortality rates are increasing by over 20% since mid 2021, and we don't know what's causing that. And I believe it's these demonic entities have taken over and causing everybody to go insane.
Right.
That's
What does that say?
really.
What does that say about our mental health system?
We have none.
Antipsychotic sales have soared to 14.54 billion in 2021, expected to soar to 15.5 billion in 2022. So these guys are making a fortune off of selling drugs that absolutely do nothing. They're just major tranquilizers. They cure absolutely nothing. The antidepressant market up to 15.98 billion by 2023. 2017, over 1 million children under the age of 6 are put on psychiatric drugs in America. This is our mental health system. You know,
Yeah,
the psychiatric mafia and big pharma are fostering on us, and it doesn't cure anything. It's just making us worse. We got more psychiatrists, more psychologists, more psychiatric drugs on the planet than ever before in our history. And look at what's happening.
yeah, just getting worse and worse. Well, Jerry, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. I want to have you on again because I want to discuss some of the more spiritual aspects of this. Now that you've laid out kind of the factual aspects, what can we do? As because it's a spiritual problem. It's not
Yes,
a physical or a psychological problem. It's
exactly
a
right.
spiritual problem.
The spiritual disorder. Schizophrenia's got nothing to do with any physical anything. And
Yep.
these medicines are like are pouring Thorazine on a magnetic field and expecting the magnetic field to dissipate because you poured some physical substance on it. These are not physical entities.
No, they're not. All right, Jerry. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks for having me. Appreciate you.
You bet. Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching. Hit like and subscribe and all that. And I am Jay Weidner, and you are watching Reality Check. Thank you very much for watching, and help your friends that have mental problems. They need our help.